The cowboy noticed her because she didn't look up. Everyone else who got turned away from Miller's general store argued, pleaded, cursed their luck. But she simply stood there for a moment too long, her shoulders tight, her chin tucked in as if she were bracing against something heavier than hunger. Dust clung to the hem of her faded dress, and the sun had burned it nearly the same color as the road. She held a small sack in her hands, light enough that it barely dented the cloth. And when the door shut behind her, she didn't turn back. She stepped aside, letting other customers pass, like she had already accepted that there was no space left for her in that place, or maybe in this town. The cowboy sat on the edge of the boardwalk, boot heel hooked on a post, watching without meaning to. He had come in for coffee and salt pork, nothing more. But something about the way she swallowed and kept walking tugged at him. Hunger had a sound to it. He knew that sound well. It was the quiet kind. He watched her cross the street, each step measured, careful, as though wasting energy was a sin. A memory rose: uninvited cold nights, an empty skillet, the long echo of pride arguing with survival. Before he could talk himself out of it, he stood. His shadow stretched long across the dirt as he called out, not loud, not soft either, just enough to reach her without startling her. She turned then, slow, wary, eyes sharp despite the exhaustion etched around them. He tipped his hat, not smiling. "Come with me," he said, voice rough from years of dust and wind. "I'll fill your table tonight." The words surprised even him, hanging between them heavier than a promise. She studied his face the way a person studies a trail they're not sure is safe, weighing risk against need. Around them, the town moved on, horses snorted, doors creaked. Laughter burst and faded, but for a moment, the world narrowed to the space between them. Finally, she nodded once, not in gratitude, not in trust, but in necessity. And just like that, two strangers stepped off the road they were given and onto one neither of them had planned. He walked ahead at first, not because he didn't care, but because he understood fear well enough to know it needed room to breathe. The town thinned as they moved away from the storefronts, buildings giving way to fences, then open land where the wind carried the smell of sage and dry earth. She followed a few steps behind, quiet, eyes always moving. After a while, he slowed until they walked side by side, the silence stretching but not breaking. He told her his name without flourish, like it was just another tool he carried, worn but useful. She hesitated before giving hers, and when she did, it sounded like something she hadn't spoken in a while. They reached his place, a small spread of land with a low cabin crouched against the wind, a corral, and smoke curling faintly from a chimney that hadn't known much use lately. He saw her take it all in, saw the calculation soften just a fraction. Inside, the cabin was clean in the way of a man who didn't own much but respected what he had. He set about his work without ceremony, beans soaking, meat sizzling, bread warming, movements practiced, steady. The smell filled the space slowly, the kind of smell that makes a person ache before it comforts them. She sat at the table, hands folded, posture rigid as if she might be asked to leave at any second. He noticed how her fingers trembled when he set a cup of water in front of her, noticed how she waited for permission that never came. When he finally told her to eat, the first bite undid something in her. She tried to hide it, but tears slipped free anyway, landing quietly on the table. He pretended not to see. Some kindness worked better when it wasn't acknowledged. Outside, the sun dipped low, throwing fire across the sky, and for the first time that day, the world felt less sharp around the edges. They ate in near silence, not awkward, just full. Full of food, yes, but also of something neither of them had expected when the day began. When the plates were empty, she leaned back slightly, a hand resting on her stomach as if reassuring herself the meal was real. She thanked him then, voice steady but low, and told him why the store had turned her away: bad harvest, husband gone, debt stacking faster than hope. He listened without interruption, the way a man does when he knows words won't fix what's broken, but attention might keep it from breaking further. When she finished, the cabin felt smaller, heavier with truths laid bare. He didn't offer pity. He offered a chair by the fire, a place to rest, and a simple statement: she could stay the night. No questions asked. Relief crossed her face, followed quickly by caution, but exhaustion won in the end. As the fire crackled, She slept sitting up at first, then slumped gently, trust arriving in inches. He stayed awake long after, staring into the flames, aware that a single sentence spoken outside a store had changed the shape of two lives. The night pressed in around the cabin, vast and quiet, but inside, there was warmth, and for the first time in a long while, the cowboy felt that feeding someone else had fed something in him too. That morning came slow and pale, the kind of dawn that didn't rush anyone into believing things would be better. Just because the sun showed up, the cowboy was already awake when she stirred, sitting at the small table with his hat beside him, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had gone cold. He watched her wake the way one watches a skittish animal, still, patient, giving her space to remember where she was and why she didn't need to be afraid. When her eyes opened, panic flashed for a heartbeat before the smell of coffee and wood smoke anchored her. She straightened, brushing hair from her face, embarrassed by the vulnerability of sleep. He nodded once, a quiet acknowledgement that didn't pry or demand explanation. Outside, the land stretched wide and honest, dew clinging to the grass like the world had paused overnight. He told her there was work if she wanted it. Nothing fancy, help with meals, mending, keeping the place alive. No pressure, no promises beyond today. She listened carefully, weighing his words the same way she'd weighed his offer the day before. Survival had taught her that kindness often came with hooks, but there were none in his voice. She agreed, softly. They worked side by side that morning, movements finding rhythm without instruction. As the hours passed, something loosened between them, not trust exactly, but familiarity. The sense that neither was pretending to be more than they were. And in that shared quiet, the cowboy realized this wasn't charity anymore. It was companionship, fragile but real. The town noticed her return before the cowboy did. When he rode in for supplies days later and saw her walking beside him instead of behind, heads turned, whispers followed them like dust. He felt the old anger rise, the kind reserved for people who believed hardship was a personal failure. But he kept his face calm, his posture unyielding. At the store, Miller hesitated before serving them, eyes flicking to her worn dress, then to the cowboy's steady gaze. Money exchanged hands. Goods crossed the counter. Dignity, for once, remained intact. Outside, she exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding for years. That night, she spoke more freely, laughter slipping through her words like something newly remembered. She told him stories of her past life, small joys buried under loss. He shared fewer words, but the ones he offered carried weight, regrets. Choices made because there were no good options left. When she reached across the table and touched his hand, it wasn't romantic. It was grounding, to people acknowledging that they were still here, still standing. The fire burned low as night deepened, and for the first time, the cabin didn't feel like a temporary shelter. It felt like a place being claimed. Change didn't arrive all at once. It came in increments: repaired fences, fuller shelves, mornings that began with purpose instead of dread. She grew stronger, standing taller, her eyes brighter. He found himself smiling more, a habit that surprised him. When winter threatened, they faced it together, preparing without fear. One evening, as snow fell silent and thick outside the cabin, she spoke the truth they had both been circling. She didn't ask for rescue. She asked for partnership. The cowboy considered it carefully, not because he didn't want it, but because he respected what it meant. When he finally nodded, it wasn't dramatic. It was certain. The promise was unspoken, but understood. No one would ever be turned away hungry in this place again. Outside, the storm raged, but inside, there was warmth, food, and a future built not on grand gestures, but on a single moment of compassion outside a store, a moment that proved even in a hard land, humanity could still choose mercy. Spring came like a cautious visitor, testing the land before deciding to stay. The snow pulled back inch by inch, revealing ground that looked raw but ready, much like the two people working it. The woman moved through the cabin now, as if it had always known her, her touch evident in small things. A stitched curtain, herbs drying by the window, the smell of bread returning more often than not. The cowboy noticed these changes the way a man notices the weather, not loudly, but deeply. He found himself listening for her steps in the morning, measuring the day by whether her voice was part of it. One afternoon, a rider appeared on the horizon, slow and deliberate. The cowboy's body reacted before his mind did, hand drifting near his side. Instinct sharpened by years of trouble arriving on horseback. The man brought news from the town talk, mostly. Questions about who she was, why she'd stayed, what claim she had to the land. The woman heard every word from the doorway, her face calm but her spine straightening. Old fears stirred, the memory of being judged, dismissed, reduced to need. When the rider left, silence stretched between them. Finally, she said she wouldn't blame him if he wanted her gone. The cowboy turned then, eyes steady, voice firm. "This is your place as much as mine," he said. And for the first time, she believed a future wasn't something that could be taken from her so easily. The test came sooner than expected. A dry spell hit the region hard, and desperation followed close behind. One evening, a woman arrived at the cabin with 2 children clinging to her skirts, eyes hollow with hunger. The woman from the store recognized the look immediately. It was the mirror of her own past. She didn't hesitate. Food was set out. Water was drawn. The children ate like they feared it might vanish mid-bite. Later, when the visitors slept by the fire, she asked the cowboy if they could afford this kind of kindness. He looked around the room, at the shared space they had built, and answered honestly no. Not always, but they could afford to be human. Word spread quietly. The cabin became a place whispered about not as charity, but as fairness. Work was exchanged for meals, stories for shelter. Not everyone approved. Some called it foolish, others called it dangerous. But the land responded in its own way. Rain finally came, soft and steady, and the first green shoots pushed through soil that had nearly been written off as dead. Standing side by side in the rain, the woman laughed openly for the first time since her life had broken apart. The sound startled the cowboy more than gunfire ever had. It was on a calm evening, with the sky painted low and red, that he finally spoke the words he'd been carrying. He told her he didn't just want to survive beside her, he wanted to grow old with her, argue with her, build something that would outlast both of them. She didn't cry this time. She smiled, slow and sure, the smile of someone who had earned every ounce of happiness she allowed herself to feel. When he took her hand, it felt inevitable, like the land itself had been guiding them here all along. Months later, as they sat at a long table surrounded by neighbors who no longer whispered, but laughed freely, the woman caught sight of the road leading from town. She remembered the day she'd been turned away, the weight of that moment still sharp in her memory. She squeezed the cowboy's hand and leaned close, whispering that one sentence had changed everything. He nodded, eyes warm, watching the table fill with food and life. Outside, the land stretched wide and open, no longer empty, no longer cruel, just waiting for people brave enough to choose kindness when it mattered most. Trouble never announced itself the way people expected. It didn't ride in shooting or shouting. It crept, it settled, it watched. The cowboy felt it long before it showed its face. A tension in the air that made the horses restless and sleep come light. The land had grown valuable, water held longer now. Crops stood healthier than others nearby, and with that came eyes that measured and counted. One morning, they found fence posts pulled loose, not broken, just undone enough to send a message. The woman stood beside him, arms folded against the chill, anger burning brighter than fear. She knew this kind of warning. It was the same tone the storekeeper had used months ago, quiet exclusion dressed up as circumstance. Riders began passing more often, slowing near the property line, their glances lingering too long. In town, conversations cut short when they entered. Prices climbed. Credit vanished. The cowboy took it all in without comment, but that night, as he cleaned his rifle by the fire, she asked the question neither of them wanted to voice: how far would others go to take what they'd built? He answered honestly, as far as they thought they could. The silence that followed was heavy, but not hopeless. This wasn't the life either of them had chosen by accident, and neither intended to surrender it quietly. The confrontation came under a wide sky, blue and merciless. 3 men rode up just past noon, stopping where the fence should have been whole. Their smiles were thin, practiced, the kind worn by men who believed the law bent toward whoever held more power. They spoke of land rights, of old claims suddenly remembered, of progress that required sacrifice. The cowboy listened, calm as stone, when they turned their attention to the woman speaking over her, round her, as if she were an accessory. Something hardened in his eyes, but it was her voice that cut through them, steady and clear. She told them what this place was built on: work, fairness, and the simple refusal to turn people away hungry. She told them they would not take it without showing their true faces to everyone watching. The men laughed at first. Then they noticed the neighbors gathering at a distance, people who had eaten at that table, slept by that fire, been treated like they mattered. The power shifted, subtle but undeniable. The riders left with threats instead of promises, dust swallowing their retreat. The woman's hands shook afterward, adrenaline leaving her raw. The cowboy wrapped his coat around her shoulders without a word. Courage, he knew, didn't mean fearlessness. It meant standing anyway. That night, the cabin filled again, not with strangers this time, but with allies. Plans were made, watches set, stories shared, not out of comfort, but commitment. As the fire burned low, the woman realized something that made her chest ache. She was no longer alone in this fight, and neither was he. The land outside seemed to breathe with them, wind moving through grass like a quiet agreement. Later, when the others had gone, she stood at the doorway looking out into the dark. She admitted the fear. She still carried the memory of losing everything once before. The cowboy came to stand beside her, voice low and sure. "They took from you when you stood alone," he said. "That won't happen again." She leaned into him, not seeking protection, but partnership. Whatever came next, legal battles, hard seasons, or worse, they would meet it together. And somewhere beyond the dark horizon, the future shifted, not gentler, but stronger, forged by two people who had learned that kindness was not weakness, and love was not a liability, it was a stand.